What you can do as a human being, regardless of whether you have a drinking problem or not, is you can talk about these treatments, these methods. And that's how you help somebody else. You go to a dinner party and you go, oh, I heard about a pill that you can take before you drink. It doesn't matter if you use it yourself or not. It's called naltrexone. Have you ever heard of naltrexone? Start conversations. That is a life-saving medication that's been approved since 1994, specifically for alcohol misuse. And the fact that a doctor will deny a patient that, in my opinion, is malpractice. It's ignorance.
Good morning, Marcella. How you doing?
Good morning, Aaron. I am great. How are you?
Good. Excited for another episode of How's My Drinking Today? And we have a very special guest joining us. We have Claudia Christian. Hi, Claudia.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
I'm great. Happy to be here.
Yes, thank you for joining us. I'm sure there's a lot of our listeners that probably already know who you are, but I'd love for you to kind of maybe start off with a little bit of an intro about yourself, a little bit about your personal journey as well.
Sure. I had a drinking problem, which I tried all of the normal available treatments for and non-treatments, peer support in the form of AA meetings and rehab facilities and psychotherapy and talk therapy and you name it, hypnotherapy, vitamin therapy, lots of different things. I eventually stumbled upon the Sinclair Method in 2009. It was purely by accident, and I had a really rough time obtaining the medication. My general practitioner refused me. My other doctor refused me. I fought to get it online illegally. I mean, I really went through the ringer of trying to do this because I had run out of options from my own drinking. I had gone from being a social drinker to a heavy drinker to abstinence to a binge drinker, which I now know was an effect of the alcohol deprivation effect. So once I started drinking again, I had no off button. So at that point, I knew that if I relapsed again, I could be at risk of seizure, stroke, death, because I'd come that close to it in my last detox. So at that point, I was desperate, and I finally got the naltrexone, and I had an immediate positive response in my drinking. I was one of those responders that had pretty bad side effects, but noticed that I literally had complete control over my drinking. I just didn't want to in the beginning. And of course, over time, that regulates and your body gets used to the medication. I had my ups and downs with TSM. I was on it for 9 years, many years very successfully. Some years I relapsed. I've spoken about that very publicly in order to help other people understand that they need to address the underlying issues of why they drink in the first place. My journey was that I immediately went full-time into advocacy. By 2010, I had written my book. By 2012, I was making a documentary. By 2014, I opened a nonprofit organization to help people with their own TSM journey. And I didn't really take care of a lot of the things that I should have in my own recovery journey. So my experience on TSM was the good, the bad, and the ugly. And now that gave me a lot of really great foundation to help others not make the same mistakes that I did. I am a complete believer in TSM when used properly. I myself quit drinking, I think 7 or 8 years at this point, simply because I no longer felt it served me in any way, shape, or form. But having had the choice to actually continue using alcohol, I think was important to me on a psychological level in the beginning of my TSM journey. It was too daunting for me to think like, oh my God, I'm going to be sober from now on for the rest of my life. You know, I was looking at 40, 50 years of sobriety. So to have the choice to now choose to be abstinent and be happy in my sobriety is such a game changer from when I was in enforced sobriety and I was miserable and craving all the time. I have zero cravings for alcohol. I have alcohol in the house. It doesn't bother me. Some of my friends drink. My partner has the occasional drink. I have just no desire, which is a completely different place than what I was pre-TSM. So I continue to advocate for this treatment because I believe in it so much.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I do want to say, it looks like I'm crying. I'm not. There's something in my end. I cannot get it out.
I know my story moved you so much.
It did move me. And I'm going to be honest with you. I have actually cried in every episode that we've done. So I probably will at some point, but this is just my eye.
No worries.
But Claudia, you brought up a few really great points. And, you spoke about just like trying different methods to quit drinking several times. And I know that a lot of the people that we actually speak to at Ria Health have kind of done the same thing. And I kind of went through a little bit of the same, just trying different supplements and things. And you just feel so defeated and also so scared that like the next thing maybe is not going to work for you.
Oh, yeah.
What kept you motivated to keep searching and, just keep going?
Because I knew that I could not stay abstinent on my own because of the debilitating mental and physical cravings I experienced during the alcohol deprivation effect period. So I would have the honeymoon period of 3 months of abstinence. And then suddenly this vicious little, I call it the lizard in the head, would start saying to me, have a drink. You don't have a drinking problem. You've been sober for 3 months. It's so insidious. I know that the word addiction is not used by some people, but I'm going to use it for the sake of not having to say substance use disorder every single time. But that that little pesky voice that comes with any sort of compulsive behavior, aka addiction, I think is the downfall of most of us. You have people who have had these long bouts of happy sobriety and then they just think they're normal again. And they go out with friends and they go, oh, I'll have a sip of beer. It's like the same thing with cigarette smokers. They can not touch cigarettes for 10 years and then they go to a party and have one puff and they're back to a pack a day like that.
Mhm.
I knew that my binges were getting progressively worse and worse and worse. I could not risk another binge. I just knew it, that I would probably die from this if I didn't find something. So was I nervous when I tried naltrexone for the first time? Absolutely. I mean, I had almost 4 months of abstinence under my belt. I felt great. I was, my system was clean. I was functioning at my highest level, but I knew I would relapse. I knew it was coming. So I forced myself to start TSM in hopes that I really would find what I read in the book, which was pharmacological extinction. I wanted my brain to be normal again. I did not want alcohol to be important. When I was before the addiction crept in, I was normal. I didn't think about alcohol. I didn't think about drinking or not drinking. And suddenly it was all consuming once my neural pathways were so engorged, you know, once that learning took place, as Dr. Sinclair says, I learned the behavior. And now I had to unlearn it so that I would be free from these compulsive thoughts about alcohol. And it worked. In that regard, it worked.
You just mentioned something really fascinating that I actually didn't know about your story. So you were already 4 months sober when you started naltrexone.
Yes.
And I think that's super important to just bring up here because there are a lot of people, like you said, that are like, well, I haven't drank in 2 months. Like, I don't think I need the medication at this point. So
Yeah.
how was that for you?
It was really, first of all, my system was so clean because I didn't take any drugs or medications or there was no alcohol. So I really, really felt the medication in my system, but I persevered because I did notice that I couldn't even finish the glass of wine. But I mean, for me to do that, I knew my behavior so well. I had tracked every single, usually hormone related relapse throughout my drinking history. So I knew that I was heading for one. I just knew it. I knew that this was not sustainable, that I had had up to 10 months of sobriety at other stages in my life.
Mhm.
Never really happy. The first 3, 4 months, usually very honeymoon happy. After that, it was always this critical planning of like, I can't go there because there's alcohol. I can't see that person because she's drinks. I can't, it was like this mental chess game that was still, once again, in my opinion, I was still in alcoholic behavior because my life was still, even though I wasn't actually drinking, I was planning everything around the lack of or the inability to consume alcohol. So that's still taking up precious mind space. And my brain was still not clear of that. There is not 1 second of my time in the last God knows how many years that I even think about alcohol other than, oh, I could use some wine in this recipe, and do I have any, I mean, literally. So it's such a overwhelming difference of quality of life when you don't have that headspace being taken up by the procuring, hiding, drinking, planning. And when you're abstinent, the avoiding, the planning of not going to parties, the antisocial behavior you have to suddenly endure because you can't be around it, or you don't want to get triggered. It's like, you can trigger me all you want. I'm not drinking. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, in my abstinence, my chosen abstinence post TSM, in this time period, I lost my father, I lost my aunts. I mean, I went through tremendous trauma, and I never thought about drinking. I mean, that is night and day between the
Yeah.
old days when everything triggered me to drink. An unkind word would trigger me to drink. So
Mm-hmm.
it's night and day. The resilience when you're in a situation during your recovery where you have choice is completely different.
Yeah, because you feel like you have the control, you have the choice to make it for yourself.
Mhm.
Yeah, and there's no pesky cravings.
You mentioned a few times the alcohol deprivation effect, and I know
Mhm.
I'm familiar with it, but maybe for our listeners, do you mind just sharing what that means?
In a nutshell, just in layman's terms, it simply means that once you have wired your brain to want ethanol, then your brain, even when you're not actually actively taking it, your brain is seeking and wants it. And so the second you get a taste of it again and your brain gets the ethanol into, it goes wild pretty much. This is why you hear about people in AA or something that have 20 years of sobriety. They have one beer and they're off to the racetracks. It's almost as if that thing has been sleeping, but you wake it up with just the tiniest taste of alcohol. So in the beginning, during the alcohol, deprivation effect, it's really when your body and brain is deprived of that substance, it can be fine for a while without the cravings, but then the cravings begin. And then once you do actually take some of that, it's much like sugar.
Mhm.
People who go on a no sugar diet, in the beginning, sugar becomes repulsive. It's too sweet. But then they have tiny bits of it, and the brain goes, "Ooh, I like that." And now they eat more sugar than they did before the diet, before the anti sugar diet. So, in this sense, you see people who, they'll control their drinking. I mean, I was a heavy drinker, but I was not a binge drinker until I stopped drinking completely. And then when I resumed drinking, I became a very heavy binge drinker. It's like my off button did not exist. So Dr. Sinclair himself said to me, he said, that's a prime example of the alcohol deprivation effect, is that your brain, unbeknownst to you, was just craving ethanol, craving alcohol,
It's like it's just hiding there waiting.
just hiding there.
Yeah.
Yes.
You said it in a video too a long time ago. I think that was the one where you said you relapsed, right? Because you potentially said, "Oh, wait, well, I'm okay now. I could just maybe have one glass of wine again." And I think that kind of led you back to the cycle where like, oh, it crept back up. You fall into
Yes.
this, tunnel again and you're kind of drinking once more.
Well, yes, you have one. That's the really insidious thing is this is pre-TSM we're talking about for
Mhm.
me.
Yep.
So I'll have the 5 months of sobriety, and then I'll say, well, it seems like I'm fine. I have control again. I didn't drink for 5 months. So then I'll have one glass of wine, and it's a success. I went, wow, I had one glass, and I stopped. And then the next time you have two glasses.
Mhm.
And then the next time you buy the bottle and bring it home. And it's just that vicious cycle of there's never enough all of a sudden, even though you were fine in the beginning. That's why I'm always I'm very frightened in a way when people tell me, oh, no, I was on it for 3 years, but now I just drink occasionally without the naltrexone. I'm like, please don't do that because you will most likely relearn the behavior of excess drinking. It might take time. For me, it didn't. When I relapsed in 2015, I mean, I relearned the behavior like that once I went off the naltrexone, which began as a sort of mistake of judgment. Did I take the pill? What time did I take it? I got lazy about that. This was in year 5, I think, of being on TSM.
Mhm.
And that just snowballed into the worst bender of my life. So it just shows you that even though I had been normal for 5 years, you can turn abnormal and back to excess drinking as quick as a day.
Yeah.
I've had clients that relapsed in a spectacular manner after only missing one dose. I mean, it's critical to stay compliant on targeted use of naltrexone. It's everything. As doctors Sinclair and Escapa say, it is the golden rule. Compliance is everything. Medication adherence is everything when you're on this treatment.
I'm curious, how did, because you've obviously been in Hollywood for a very long time. You've done plenty of films, and one of them, which is interesting enough, is you did Clean and Sober, right? Which was
Yes.
around the whole treatment and rehab space. I'm kind of curious how that affected it, and then how was the help from family, friends, even colleagues, right, in Hollywood?
Clean and Sober, I was a normie back then. I barely drank. That was when I was in my 20s. So I didn't think about alcohol. I'd have the occasional drink, but I was working and busy and had no compulsive behaviors at all in my life. So when I did Clean and Sober, it was kind of strange to me to think, wow, people end up in places like this. I mean, little did I know 30 years later, or 20 years, 25 years later, that would be me. As far as help, it's kind of if you're going to be completely honest with yourself, which I am always, I always strive to be honest with myself. I can say that I didn't receive a lot of help, but I can also say that I absolutely didn't ask for a lot of help. I had a family that was extremely confused and scared, and I have another sibling who had substance use disorder as well. So my they were not in any way, shape, or form prepared to have two children suffering from this, and they did not know how to handle it. And they both of my parents reacted in different ways. Eventually, as you can see in my documentary, One Little Pill, my father did come to some sort of understanding of what it was like after suffering his own sort of attachment to a medication that he was given for cancer. So he kind of got it. He was like, "Oh, that's what my kids were struggling with. That's what addiction is. It's this uncontrollable need for the substance." So he, in his own way, understood what I went through. As far as friends, I had, a lot of good time party buddies that disappeared when my drinking got out of control. And so I was very isolated, very much alone. I had a couple of really old friends that are still my friends that just sort of I like to say they went into holding mode. They were there on the peripheral, just not judging me, loving me, but from a
Mhm.
distance. But I knew that they would always be there and they're still my friends. So they saw me through the best and the worst of my life. And those friendships were never at risk. It was the newer friendships that people kind of went, whoa, she's drinking too much. Let me get out of here. As far as business, I think it was critical for me to do what I thought was right as a human being, and that was to come out and to talk about this because nobody was talking about the Sinclair Method when I started talking about it in 2009. And I mean, there were no resources, there was no support system, there were no chat rooms, there was nothing. There was a book, and that was it.
Mhm.
And I thought that if I did not talk about this, that I would literally just be the worst kind of human being in the world, somebody who found this golden elixir, who like a youth serum or something and doesn't tell anybody else. You know, I found this magical cure for alcohol use disorder and I'm going to sit on it. No, I mean, I thought that would be like the least loving thing as a human being I could do for society. So I took whatever little platform I had, which at the time was a beautiful sci-fi fan community, and I got them to buy the book and talk about the book, my memoir, and then I got them to raise money for me to make One Little Pill, and then I found my wonderful executive director, Jenny Williamson, and she started to work with me and then eventually for me and for what was then C3 Foundation and is now Options Save Lives. And we've now in year 14, I mean, we're still, struggling financially as a small 501c3 charity, but we're still here and we've managed to do what I wanted to do from the very beginning of finding this, which is I wanted to make it a household word. And that was the impetus behind going public. To answer your question, Aaron, did it hinder or hurt, or did somebody in the industry respond? No, I reached out to anybody who had a bigger name than me that was struggling with alcohol. Everybody from Ben Affleck to Brad Pitt when he came out in GQ and said he was alcoholic.
Mhm.
Every actor I could find, every actress I could find that had an alcohol problem, I reached out to their publicists. I wanted anyone to get on this method that had a bigger name than me to help promote this method so more people would find out about it. I wanted to be on the cover of People magazine, with some big star like Ben Affleck saying, I found the Sinclair method. I was like, I was visualizing that. And I thought, oh my gosh, why can't I reach anybody? And it was very frustrating. And I realized that this is the whole problem about why we aren't fully funded, why telemedicine companies aren't making billions of dollars. It's the shame and the stigma surrounding it. People find a way to deal with it, and then they just disappear and they forget about talking about it because they want to leave it behind them.
Mhm.
And that is the biggest problem. And another reason why I wanted to come out is to normalize this, is to say that it's not like I'm the only one who drank too much. There are millions of people die every year. It's probably up to about 3.6 million now every year. So all of these people who are hiding in shame and not discussing it with their medical providers, with their friends and family, is not helping our cause at all.
Yep.
True.
The one thing I hope is that people just continue to normalize it and reduce shame and stigma by discussing it, by saying, yeah, I think I drink too much, or you know what? I'd like to cut down, or gee, I hear it's really toxic for humans. So boy, I'd like to get alcohol out of my life, just to normalize it. It's so weird. We can talk about dieting all the time. We can talk about mental health issues, oh, I'm bipolar. Nobody blinks, you know,
Yeah.
but talk about having a substance use disorder and everybody just has this shame of this pit in their stomach of like, oh, not me, oh no, she's fine. It's just, why can't we just discuss it like any other health issue? And that would normalize it, and that would make treatment more accessible. It would make doctors more well informed. If patients weren't afraid to go to their doctor to admit that they're uncomfortable with their drinking, and if doctors actually listen.
Yeah.
My doctor said, when I said I was drinking 2.5 bottles of wine a night, he said, oh, that's not so bad. I mean, seriously? That means he's either drinking the same amount
Mhm.
or that, he has millions of patients doing the same really destructive thing every night. And it's like, no, it's not okay. If somebody comes to a doctor and says, I'm uncomfortable with my drinking, that doctor better be well versed and educated in multiple different in multiple options for that individual,
Mhm.
not just the lazy response of, why don't you just quit and go to a 12-step program? That's not even
Yeah.
a medical
Yeah, it
treatment. Sorry.
doesn't work. I mean, there's what's interesting too is and I know this from past history, there's companies even where like in their wellness program, if you get a DUI, for example, you could be fired.
Yes.
So rather than say, hey, there might be a problem, let me try to
Yeah.
get them help or something. So that's where the whole stigma also from there comes in. So there's a level where it's the healthcare organizations, like you mentioned, right? Lack of education and things like that, and then there's, companies that just their idea is kind of maybe in the right place, but it's the wrong way. And people get afraid. They don't want to go seek treatment. They don't want to say they have a problem. And sometimes people don't even realize they do.
Exactly. Especially in law enforcement, airline
Mhm.
Yeah.
pilots, doctors, all of these people who, for our public safety, it's critical that they're not drunk.
Mhm. Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
the ones that have the most punitive actions against them from their employers
Mhm.
if they do admit that they have a drinking problem. So what do? They don't admit it.
They don't admit it. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty scary.
It's an unhealthy, scary cycle that we're in, and it needs to stop. And it needs to stop. And I think the first step is anyone who is uncomfortable with their drinking just needs to start talking about it. That would help
Yeah.
all of this. It would help
Mhm.
everybody. It's just talk to your friends and family, admit it to your medical providers, seek out options, and just don't keep it to yourself. It's not healthy at all. You need help, you need support during this process of recovery.
Mhm.
It's so true. So we've been discussing naltrexone and the Sinclair method a lot. But Claudia, obviously we know what it is, but do you mind kind of explaining a little bit what is the Sinclair method and how is it different from, your traditional abstinence-based treatments?
Well, the empowering thing about the Sinclair method is that you can use it to reduce drinking or to stop drinking, which in normal, I can't think of any other real treatment out there that allows you that choice, that autonomy as a human being of saying, I'm going to use this to reduce for now, but then I have an option later to go abstinent. And in very simple terms, it is an opiate antagonist. naltrexone, and you take it in a targeted manner 1 hour prior to the first drink of the day. And when you drink alcohol on naltrexone, alcohol becomes a beverage, not something that you are compelled to want more, 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 and more. So in a perfect world, what it does is it blocks the reinforcement from the alcohol. And some people like to call that the endorphins, the dopamine, the reward. It varies from individual to individual whether or not you receive a high or a buzz. There are some people who drink on naltrexone and still feel relaxed and feel kind of the same on alcohol. Other people have a drink of alcohol on naltrexone and they feel flat, nothing. They feel like it's orange juice. So it really depends on the individual and how they respond to the medication. Over time, in continuing engaging in the behavior you wish to decrease or stop, which in this case is drinking alcohol, over time, alcohol becomes less and less important. So, as Dr. Sinclair says, you unlearn the learned behavior of being compulsive about alcohol, needing more and more and more. So, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. If you want to speak on a more scientific basis, I'm sure people know you take the naltrexone and it sort of, as I say, kind of puts a condom over the opioid receptor so
Mhm.
that the endorphins released from the alcohol bounce off. They just bounce off. They don't adhere to it. When they adhere to it, then the neural pathways get bigger and bigger and bigger. So every time you drink on naltrexone, your neural pathways are shrinking back to normal. That's the behavior that we want to have occur. I like to think of it as some people call it sort of Pavlov and reverse, but I like to think of it as when you drink on naltrexone, alcohol just becomes another beverage. You just look at it and eventually you feel like, meh, like I don't really care. I could have a cup of coffee now and it would feel the same. So it doesn't become the importance of the alcohol, the focus on the alcohol becomes more diluted and fuzzier until finally your attention is drawn back to what matters, which is your friends, your family, the social engagement. So I think for a lot of people who are struggling with excess alcohol use is you realize that alcohol has become the focus. You cannot sit at a dinner party and focus on the conversation because you're looking at your wine glass and wondering where's the rest of the wine? Where how am I going to refill it? When am I going to get to refill it? Can I go sneak somewhere? It's always this huge focus on the alcohol. And I think what TSM does is it takes that away and it gives you back what matters, which is your life and community and hobbies and happiness. So it just becomes less and less important. And that leads to, of course, pharmacological extinction eventually, which people always strive for. They're like, am I in extinction yet? I try to explain to people extinction is when you forget to drink. That's my favorite thing. Like someone will say to me, oh my God, I woke up this morning and there was a half a glass left in where I left it in the living room, half a glass of wine. And I was like, okay. Has that ever happened to you before? No. Or there's a half a bottle of champagne in the refrigerator. It never used to happen. So that's when I like to tell them that is it's a form of extinction. I mean, you just forgot to finish your drink and that's kind of normal behavior.
Yeah. So, I mean, we also know that obviously you're a huge advocate of Sinclair Method, right? So you have a lot of YouTube videos that speak on it. You have the TED Talk. You already mentioned you have that one little pill, and you touched on it that you also started the C3 Foundation, which is now Option Save Lives. Can you talk a little bit about Option Save Lives and what does it do and how does that program work? And
Originally, I wanted a one-stop shopping, if you will, a one-stop resource for people. So we provide we the whole impetus behind it is empowering people on TSM to succeed. So we have had, first of all, we help people find a licensed TSM provider in their state or their country or their province. We provide free peer support in the form of social media sites, Discord. We have our own forum, our own community that people can join. We also have, of course, Get Started on TSM guide for various different types of drinkers. So you can formulate a little program for yourself. We do private virtual TSM coaching. We do live streams. We do support meetings. We have an LGBTQ meeting we do now that Jenny hosts. We really try to give people as many options as they need to succeed, whether that means using our free resources or finding a telemedicine company like RIA through us, or whether it means them, binge watching our podcasts, or we had a big TSM conferences that we have online where people can watch all these experts speak about TSM. So, I mean, it's really up to the person. I think one of the things that I was missing in my own recovery and what I didn't have on TSM were readily accessible, were any resources. I didn't have a free drink log app that I could download. We created one. I didn't have a peer support group. So we created it. I didn't have anybody, a TSM buddy. I didn't have a compliance buddy. I didn't have somebody I could just call and say, I'm struggling, or I'm drinking because when I visit this person, what does that mean? And now all of that is available. So people won't have to make the mistakes that I made. In my TED talk, I was incorrect in the fact that this is mostly biological. I only thought it was because I didn't have any support. And once I started helping myself to that exploration of self and of reasons why one person would self-medicate with a toxic solution, I realized that had I done that internal work, that inner work that I tell my clients now to do in coaching sessions, I probably would have been on TSM even a shorter amount of time and found freedom in sobriety much sooner. But my struggles hopefully will, work out to help other people. But had I had a TSM coach, had I had somebody saying, look, are you exploring why you're drinking? Why are you drinking when you see this family member? Why are they triggering you? That needs to be addressed. I just blindly popped a pill and drank. I didn't do anything else. And that was to my own detriment. But on the other hand, looking at the bright side and making lemonade out of lemons is now I have all of this rich knowledge of what not to do on TSM.
Yeah.
So I'm a veritable Mount Vesuvius of knowledge of what not to do on TSM. So in that regard, I can certainly help people with my blatant mistakes, but Options Save Lives is all about empowering people and helping them succeed. And that's what we try to do with our resources and with our website, and also with our live meetings and everything else that we've accomplished. And I'm proud of it. I mean, if people manage to find our site, they will find pretty much everything they need to start their journey.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that they need, and to do it properly, to do it well. They can even watch the movie for free now.
Nice.
We put One Little Pill up there and I created that tool for loved ones. So if you go to your parents and say, I'm going to try this method, and they say, oh my God, you're going to drink? Oh my God. And you can say, hey, here's a film that's less than an hour long. Why don't you watch it and then we'll discuss it before you blow a gasket.
Mm-hmm.
So that tool is specifically for loved ones to understand the science behind TSM. And in fact, when I was describing how naltrexone works in a targeted manner, there's a wonderful little animated video within the movie that shows the brain drinking and the endorphins popping off of the receptor. So you can literally show that to people and say, here it is. And it's hopefully a very helpful tool for individuals.
I will say that it is a very helpful tool. Like when I started TSM myself a few years ago, I watched it like 3 times in a row. And now it's just like I had already spoken to you by then and, watch your TED Talk a few times. But like that is such a powerful tool for even people just wanting to understand what naltrexone is and how it works. So I highly recommend it. And also thank you for creating that.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I think that was one of the most enjoyable experiences I've ever had working with Adam Schomer and everyone on the film, and having it really funded with love. I mean, my science fiction fans, my film and television fans in general, were so generous. They not only supported me when I came out as having a problem with alcohol, but then they funded that film, and they single-handedly provided this tool for millions of people to get help. And so it was really a labor of love, and I'm very proud of it. I am much more proud of it than my TEDx talk now that I've looked back on that and go, oh man, if I just would have done that talk 2 years later, I would have had such a different perspective on it.
It's still such a powerful talk, though. I mean, people at Real Health still bring it up. Like, I watched that TED talk by Claudia Christian. It's
I know
powerful.
everybody. That seems to be their gateway, and as long as it's their gateway to TSM. But I just hope that once they find RIA and other providers, then they will understand that it's a lot more than just a biological issue. You've got to work on the underlying issues of why you're drinking. Why?
Yeah.
That's the question I never asked myself. Why? Why do you need a glass of wine when you do XYZ? Why?
Yeah. The true.
Now that I don't have alcohol in my life, I'm like, why did I need it all the time?
Yeah.
Because clearly I was in pain, and that's what I see people now, my clients now, and I realize that everyone's in a little bit of pain, and we just have to unearth that pain and bring it to life and kiss it goodbye.
Mhm.
So true. So, Claudia, I know that your mission is obviously to like spread the word about naltrexone and TSM, and thankfully it is becoming a little bit more recognized now. But as you know, there's still a long way to go. So, what do you think needs to happen to make the medication-assisted treatment just more widely known, not just like for people struggling, but just in the medical community?
Well, that's a tenfold thing. First of all, I think in medical school that they need to be educated right off the bat. Students need to be taught about something other than a 12-step program. They have to be taught about every medication that is used on and off label for alcohol use disorder. That is something that is not being done, and that maybe now it is, but it wasn't being done up until, the last I spoke to a medical student, they said that they had very little substance use disorder training at all, a few hours, and most of it was 12-step, as we discussed. So they need to learn about the medications so that when they do become doctors or medical providers, they know, and this means any medical provider from RNs onward, anybody who can prescribe, psychiatrists as well, need to learn about these medications that are used for alcohol use disorder. In addition, as I mentioned before, people need to talk about it. You need to reduce the shame and stigma. The more people talk about it, the more accepted it's going to become. But unfortunately, with any sort of compulsive disorder, people hide it, whether it's an eating disorder or a drinking disorder, is they get better and then they never talk about it again. We can't do that. We have to keep talking about what made us better, what helped us, and not in a way to sort of sham the public, like, oh, I used this diet pill and lost 100 pounds. No, it's I used this medication properly the way I was supposed to use it, and I'm now drinking 40% less. That is, if that's the truth and you come out with that and you tell your doctor that, you tell your friends and family that, that's that's a gift to society. And that's going to make it easier for all of us to learn about it, spreading the word. I mean, honestly, if I'm just one person that tried to start this movement, and then all these other people came along, these younger people who are doing it now, doing YouTube videos, from Katie Lane to all of these coaches that I have are doing. They're on TikTok. They're on. I mean, it's now all these people are talking about the Sinclair Method. And the more they do that, then one person learns of it. I mean, think of the 5 million people who watched my TEDx talk. Well, now they tell 10 people. And now suddenly another 15 million people know about it. I mean, that's the power of not only social media and the internet in general, but it's also us as human beings is sharing. We need to share it. And especially with our medical providers, we have to insist that they give us these medications that will help us, period. I mean, that is the thing. I was so angry when I hear that people they find the courage to go to their doctor and they say, I have a drinking problem. Please prescribe naltrexone. And the doctor refuses them. That to me I get enraged because that is a life-saving medication that's been approved since 1994, specifically for alcohol misuse. And the fact that a doctor will deny a patient that, in my opinion, is malpractice. It's ignorance. And there's
Mhm.
nothing I detest more than ignorance. So
Yeah.
in that way, I think that what you can do as a human being, regardless of whether you have a drinking problem or not, is you can talk about these treatments, these methods. And that's how you help somebody else. You go to a dinner party and you go, oh, I heard about a pill that you can take before you drink. It doesn't matter if you use it yourself or not. It's called naltrexone. Have you ever heard of naltrexone? Start conversations. I mean, I did that for the first 4 years I was on the Sinclair Method. I made a huge ordeal about pulling the pill out. Oh, yes, this is my life-saving medication. I mean, I talked to everybody about it because I was so excited about it. And I was just hoping, and it's funny thing is that everybody wanted to talk about it because nobody had heard about it. What do you mean you take a pill before you drink
Mhm.
alcohol? Yeah, I take this pill. It's called naltrexone. I've never heard of naltrexone. I have a cousin who drinks too much. Well, you should tell them about it. And that's how you spread the word. And so I think that that's one of the most important things is just normalizing these issues that so many people have, like alcohol misuse, just normalizing it. This is how we took massive steps forward in the mental health community by people
Yep.
just saying, you know what, I have anxiety, you know what, I'm depressed, and normalizing it. It wasn't something that you hid in shame about anymore. People are normalizing that, so we can normalize this as well.
Mhm.
It's a great point.
Yeah. Well, we're coming to an end. Claudia, wanted to say thank you for joining the podcast. Want to kind of give you a few more minutes, see if there's anything else you'd want to share or mention to, our audience.
No, I mean, just to clarify, the reason why we rebranded into Options Save Lives is because it was my mistake when naming my nonprofit. I used the word foundation in the
Mhm.
because I didn't know any better. So people presumed that we were a funded foundation, even though no matter how many times we would tell people, no, we're a 501c3 charity, charitable organization, charitable. We rely on donations. So every time we said that, people still couldn't get past that word. So the reason why we rebranded, the main reason was because of that. So we had trademarked the words Options Save Lives years ago as our sort of go-to for a lot of our sites and things. And it kind of sums it up, our belief system.
Hmm.
Options save lives. If you have the option to find something that helps decrease your drinking, it's going to save your life.
Mhm.
So we
Yeah.
can't be myopic in our focus or my way or the highway. We have to open our hearts and say, well, there's other ways to treat people. There's multiple medications. There's multiple different types of peer support or professional support. And the nice thing about something like using naltrexone in a targeted manner or using naltrexone daily is you can create your own recovery plan. You can use telemedicine, you can use coaching, you can use private therapy. It's sort of like a meal planning thing. You can add whatever side dishes you want. You can join peer support or not. You can keep a drink log and you have multiple different drink logs you can choose from. So it's really nowadays things have changed so profoundly in a more positive way that I'm thrilled when I see that people are finding this and they're finding ways to use it successfully. And that's all I wanted when I started this path in 2009. I just wanted people to be able to have this information, to be able to get the medications safely and legally, and to have support. And I'm really happy when I look around today and see people like you and everyone else who are working toward that goal of helping individuals be successful with naltrexone.
Well, I think it's a great name, and we'll definitely make sure that we put your website and your podcast all in the description of this episode. So if anybody's interested, definitely go check it out.
Thank you.
And I really wanted to thank you again just for your time and really all the work that you've done. It definitely saved my life. So really appreciate it.
Oh, it's people like you that keep me going. That's the happiest I am when I hear that somebody found this information and used it and they now actually have the life they deserve.
Yep.
So we all deserve the chance to recover. And I'm just grateful that you found it and that people out here now listening to the podcast will find it too.
Mhm. Great. Well, thank you again.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Marcella.
All right. Take care. Bye.